Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight. My name is Adam Jasa. Russia is trying to scare Western nations, readying a peacekeeping force for Ukraine. Vladimir Putin's unyielding stance raises concerns he may test NATO by attacking the Baltic states. More on that in just a moment, but first tonight's headlines. Europe seeks energy independence from Russia even if war in Ukraine ends. Polish and NATO troops hold drills near tense border with Belarus. Shimon the chimpanzee throws a party at the Warsaw Zoo. Vladimir Putin has said any Western soldiers entering Ukraine to secure peace would be legitimate targets for Kremlin forces. The threat comes amid reports Russia is mustering thousands of troops for an assault on the Ukrainian-controlled part of the Donbas. Natalia Komarov reports.
Vladimir Putin said on Friday that any foreign troops stationed in Ukraine will be considered legitimate military targets.
Regarding possible troop deployments in Ukraine, this is one of the primary reasons for drawing Ukraine into NATO. Should some foreign troops appear there, especially now during military operations, we proceed from the fact that these will be legitimate targets for attack.
Putin's comments come after French President Emmanuel Macron hosted a Coalition of the Willing summit in Paris on Thursday, where 26 out of 35 countries present made a preliminary commitment to deploy troops in Ukraine after a future ceasefire.
I will not talk about the number, but it is important that we're discussing all this. And it will definitely be thousands of troops, not just a few.
According to European leaders, only Ukraine can decide whether it wants foreign troops on its soil or not.
And I can tell you today, we are ready.
Europeans are finally taking the lead when it comes to helping Ukraine defend itself amid growing uncertainty surrounding the United States' involvement in Europe's security. While President Donald Trump did promise his Polish counterpart, Karol Nawrocki, not to withdraw troops from Poland,
very happy. If anything, we'll put more there if they want.
A report by the Financial Times reveals that the Pentagon plans to phase out its financing of defense programs along NATO's eastern flank.
If, for example, the 10,000 soldiers from the US Army remain in Poland, but thousands or tens of thousands of American soldiers are withdrawn from other parts of Europe, that would be a massive weakening of European security and Poland's security as well.
The European Union aims to step in.
This is also the logic behind the 800 billion euro defence industrial plan and the logic behind the joint procurement instrument SAFE, which allows us to produce the critical capabilities that Europe needs most.
TVP World asked security analyst Krzysztof Jaworski whether this is enough.
We always could spend more money on defense, that it could be useful, and it's the art of deciding how much can we spend without jeopardizing other important parts of our budget.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has warned that Russia and China are manufacturing weapons at a staggering rate.
And this is not just to show off at major military parades in Moscow or like yesterday in Beijing, but to aggressively exert influence, attempt to reshape the global order and undermine our freedom and security.
Despite everything, Donald Trump aims to continue pushing Putin toward a ceasefire with Ukraine.
Do you plan to speak with Russia's President Putin in the near future?
What?
If you will speak with President Putin in the near future.
I will be, yeah, I will be. We're having a very good dialogue. I settled 7 wars. The one that I thought would be maybe one of the easiest. You know that feeling? You think one thing is going to be easier, turns out to be a little bit tougher.
While the West attempts to work out a scenario for a possible ceasefire and what comes next, Russia has reportedly amassed over 100,000 troops in preparation for a new offensive in Ukraine. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
Poland's role as the linchpin of Western support for Kyiv comes into doubt, as Warsaw says it will not contribute troops to the planned force to protect Ukraine. The government argues Poland will play a huge logistical and support role. Kazimierz Łysiak explains.
Poland, like we've said multiple times, will not be sending its own troops to Ukraine after the fighting ends. We are responsible for logistics, and we have the largest transport hub.
This coming from the Prime Minister of a country which spends the largest share of its gross domestic product on defense in all of NATO seems surprising at face value.
I think it was a mistake. I think it weakened Polish international position. But the fact is that also other countries neighboring Russia or neighboring the region of the war conflict, Romania, Finland, have very similar positions.
Finland indeed has a similar stance, and no wonder. After joining NATO in 2023, it became the alliance's longest border with Russia at more than 1,300 kilometers.
We are not sending Finns to the forefront in Ukraine. Finland will participate in one way or another when the time comes.
Polish military experts backed the government, arguing that Poland and other eastern flank nations would provide an essential backstop. They also need to stand ready to assist the vulnerable Baltic states if Putin chooses to attack.
This combat power has to be considered as a deterrence, as our resilience, and to change the mindset of the potential enemy that it's not a paid-off to attack us.
Poland's role in defending the eastern flank has come up during Polish President Karol Nawrocki's conversation with Donald Trump in the White House this week.
I talked about Poland's responsibility for the Baltic states and the eastern flank with U.S. President Donald Trump in Washington. It's also no coincidence that I had met with the presidents of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia before my trip to the U.S.
Aside from the strategic aspect, not sending troops to Ukraine is also a highly politicized issue in Poland. Opinion polls show more than 60% of Poles are against committing soldiers to the reassurance force. This was reflected in the Polish presidential election in June. Attitudes towards Ukraine have hardened under pressure from far-right politicians, arguing this is not our war. The government of Prime Minister Donald Tusk still supports Ukraine in its fight against Russia, but Poland won't be sending its troops to Ukraine anytime soon. From Warsaw, Kazimierz Łysiak, TVP World.
More than 30,000 troops from Poland and other NATO countries are taking part in military drills in the east of the country. Some heavy equipment was spotted on a motorway not far from the tense border with Belarus. Called Iron Defender 25, is the Polish Armed Forces' largest exercise this year, aiming to prepare for a potential Russian attack. 600 vehicles and artillery systems have been deployed, alongside over 30,000 troops, including from the US. Poland welcomed assurances from the White House earlier this week that American soldiers will stay in the country. The exercise coincides with large-scale joint drills held by Russia and Belarus. They are scheduled for next week. Speaking of Belarus, the country's authorities have arrested a Polish priest accusing him of spying. Warsaw condemned the incident as a provocation and said they were preparing retaliation. Jeremy Hołodniuk has more.
Belarus has detained a Polish Jesuit priest on charges of espionage. He is accused of gathering intelligence about the upcoming Belarusian-Russian Zapad military drills scheduled for next week. Polish officials have dismissed the allegations, calling the arrest a political provocation.
Our intelligence services categorically reject this. We will not tolerate such provocations and nonsense coming from the Belarusian side. I still do not have a clear understanding of the purpose of the Jesuits' visit. Based on the information available to me, he was visiting a fellow priest who works in Belarus, and that's all we know for now. We are taking diplomatic steps. We know what kind of regime this is. We know what to expect from it. We've already started intergovernmental consultations on how to respond to this. I'm convinced the matter will not go unanswered.
According to Belarusian investigators, Grzegorz G. has received classified documents from a Belarusian citizen, whom he promised monthly payments in exchange for details about the command structure and military counterintelligence staff.
Belarusian border guards have already tried to carry out a similar provocation earlier when Prime Minister Donald Tusk visited the border. On that occasion, they sent armed masked soldiers. And now, a Polish citizen has been apprehended. It's not true that Polish security services have at any time used members of the clergy to acquire any information about Belarusian military drills.
An espionage case has been opened under the Belarusian Criminal Code. If convicted, the Polish national could face up to 15 years in prison.
We will never again import as much as one molecule of Russian energy, a top European Union official said on Friday. And Donald Trump is said to be cross with Hungary and Slovakia for stubbornly insisting on energy ties with Moscow. Angela Skujins reports from EU headquarters in Brussels.
The European Commissioner for Energy, Dan Jorgensen, wants the EU to never be dependent on Russian fossil fuels ever again. This is even the case if Kyiv and the Kremlin secure a ceasefire deal. Now, the European Union aims to phase out all fossil fuel imports by 2027. However, Hungary and Slovakia appear to be the most major holdouts. Russia earns billions of euros annually from its fossil fuels exports, which it uses to prop up its invasion of Ukraine. But according to data, Hungary has spent around 1.6 billion euros on Russian oil and gas this year alone, with Slovakia spending an estimated 430 million. Jorgensen stated that he wants the EU's commitment to phase out these fossil fuels from Russia to be long-lasting.
This is not a temporary sanction. This is something that will stand. In my opinion, we will never again import as much as one molecule of Russian energy when this agreement is made.
Almost 1,300 kilometres south in Ukraine, the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky met with the Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico and European Council President Antonio Costa to find a way forward and out of this energy crisis. Costa and Zelensky were quick to point out that it is not only Kyiv and Brussels upset with that Central European country's dependence on Russian fossil fuels, but the US President Donald Trump is angered also.
The President said yesterday, everybody was discussing that America was very dissatisfied with some countries helping Russia's war machine, helping by buying the energy resources from Russian Federation. Undoubtedly, as I have already mentioned, Hungary and Slovakia stand among those countries, and this must be stopped, and there will be consultations held.
The EU has slashed its imports from Russia by 80%. However, the major holdout here appears to be Hungary, occupying most of that remaining 20% threshold.
Putin is developing pressure to Slovakia and Hungary to cut the supplies of energy to Ukraine because of Ukrainian attacks on oil route pipeline systems of Russian Federation, Druzhba.
Despite Hungary and Slovakia's close proximity to US President Donald Trump, it appears that they are more isolated than ever. And as the EU has made good on its pitch to diversify its energy supplies away from Russia, the credibility of the bloc hinges on whether its most reluctant members fall in line. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
Slovakia's economy is slowing due to its dependence on the automotive sector. Gross domestic product rose just 0.6% from a year earlier, the slowest pace since 2022. Maciej Wilowski looks behind the headline number.
Slovakia's economy is losing momentum, creating new problems for Prime Minister Robert Fico, who promised an economic revival when he took power in 2023. Gross domestic product, a measure of the value of goods and services produced in a given country, rose just 0.6% in the second quarter from a year ago. It was up just 0.2% from the previous quarter. That was Slovakia's slowest growth rate in over 2 years. Sluggish growth in Germany, where the key automotive sector is suffering from Chinese competition, is spilling over into Slovakia.
This is the predominant cause of the slowdown of the Slovakian economy. So any threat to the automotive business in Germany basically decreases the economic output in that very intertwined economy to the Central European kind of growth engine connected with the automotive sector.
Global trade frictions are also part of the problem.
Slovakia is a small, open economy. So for them, any problems with international trade, any issues connected with the free flow of goods.
Recent U.S. trade policy is taking a toll on Slovakia's economy.
Slovakia is also a country that not only is very much dependent on export of cars, but also it's Europe's most dependent country from that point of view on the trade to the United States or the exports to the United States.
There is a growing divergence between Slovakia's economic performance and that of its neighbors to the north and west. Poland's economy expanded by 3.4% in the second quarter. But Hungary, which like Slovakia is heavily dependent on Russian oil, is also struggling.
We are seeing within the Central and Eastern Europe is, I dare to say, disturbing dichotomy between two frontrunners, which is Poland and Czech Republic, and then Slovakia and Hungary. Slovakia fared a little bit better than Hungary.
Slovakia's heavy reliance on the automotive sector, Russian energy, and its numerous standoffs with European partners make Prime Minister Fico's task of getting the economy back on track increasingly difficult. For TVP World, I'm Maciej Wilowski.
Europeans' answer to US dominance in supercomputers was unveiled in Germany. Called Jupiter, the machine is expected to process a quintillion calculations per second. That is a figure with 18 zeros. Michel van Blumenstein has more.
Jupiter is the first supercomputer in Europe to offer what is known as exascale computing. It's capable of performing a quintillion calculations per second. That is 1 billion calculations per second, churned out by an architecture involving 24,000 graphics chips. This makes Jupiter the fourth most powerful supercomputer worldwide. Development and operating costs for the next few years, totaling 500 million euros, will be covered by the EU and Germany.
It is crucial that we do not slacken our efforts in this regard over the coming years. In Germany and in Europe as a whole, we need computing capacities that are on par with those of our international competitors.
The system will be available to researchers and businesses across the continent and in various fields to run complex artificial intelligence models. According to the Jülich Supercomputer Center, Jupiter can accurately predict weather up to 30 years in advance, and possibly even up to a century. An important reason for the EU to invest in the platform is Europe's position when it comes to the development of artificial intelligence. A recent study by Stanford University showed that the US has so far developed 40 significant AI models. China has developed 15 models, and Europe accounts for only 3.
European endeavors that are very often co-funded by public funds tend to take a bit longer. Unfortunately, there are bureaucratic processes around them.
Regardless, the German leader seems to think Jupiter will be important for Europe in its effort to catch up. For TVP World, Michiel van Blommestein.
Polish striker Robert Lewandowski was back on the national football team under the new Polish coach in a game against the Netherlands. The Barcelona star rebelled against the previous coach, who got fired in June.
The Polish national team is back in the country after it held the Netherlands to a 1-1 draw, a strong start for new coach Jan Urban against one of Europe's top teams.
There were definitely some good moments, and we can be satisfied with the result. There's a lot to improve, but there were some nice moments.
Matty Cash, who usually plays as a defender for the English club Aston Villa, stole the spotlight with a brilliant goal.
Apart from the point we earned, which might be important in these qualifiers, this win shows that with good game organization and the right mindset, we are capable of taking points from a team like the Netherlands.
Now all eyes are on Sunday's Poland versus Finland match at the Stadion Śląski. A win could bring Poland closer to World Cup qualification.
There are good and better reasons to celebrate. The Warsaw Zoo just found a really good one. Szymon, a slightly greying but vigorous chimpanzee, just passed the 40-year mark. Randy Potts was at the party.
Today is a very special occasion for Szymon the chimpanzee, who is celebrating his 40th birthday here at the Warsaw Zoo. Staff have prepared activities, games, and presents not only for Warsaw's oldest chimpanzee, but also for Warsaw's youngest humans. A full day of celebrations at the Warsaw Zoo as people both young and old, and monkeys, both young and very old, partied down with Szymon.
To celebrate this milestone, we prepared a disco-style birthday party for Szymon. His whole troop took part, but Szymon remained the main focus of the bash.
Unlike some over-the-hill birthday parties, Szymon's birthday was full of fast cars and fast friends.
I didn't expect to come across the party, so I'm incredibly happy to be here. I even dressed for the occasion, apparently. This is an actual birthday bash with decorations and chimps driving a pink Cadillac, so it's a very cool party.
Although Szymon already opened his pink Cadillac, there will be fun and games all through the weekend. Warsaw is invited on Saturday to come and celebrate Szymon's 40th birthday party. For TVP World, Randy Potts.
Now back to our main topic today. Vladimir Putin is again using scare tactic against the West rather than pursuing peace with Ukraine. Are we back at square one despite Donald Trump's hopes that peace remains within reach? Our guest to discuss the latest on this is Stephen Moore of the Ukraine Freedom Project. Stephen, thank you for joining us tonight.
Adam, always great to be with you.
Thank you. So, how seriously should we take Putin's threats of attacking Western troops if they were to secure peace in Ukraine?
You know, Putin has been threatening everything for a long time. And there's United 24, the Ukrainian media outlet, has done a great piece on all the threats that Putin's made. You know, if Ukraine gets F-16s, then Putin's going to go nuclear. If Finland joins NATO, Putin's going to go nuclear. If, you name it. Then Putin's got these nuclear threats. He never keeps them, which is, good for those of us who spend most of our time in Ukraine. And I think that, this is just part of Putin's negotiating strategy, is that he makes maximalist demands and he makes maximalist threats. And, and then he's rarely follows through.
But what we've seen in Paris when this coalition of the willing met yesterday, and also what we heard from even Donald Trump, it seems that some of his threats are falling on deaf ears these days. The West is just forging ahead with their plans.
Yeah, I think that, there was the coalition of the willing in Paris, and then there was this other meeting in Beijing of every bad guy in the world. In fact, the only one that was missing, according to your reporting earlier, was Viktor Orban. And, and so I think that you're seeing the battle lines being drawn. The Polish people know the same thing that we know, those of us living in Ukraine, and most of the rest of Eastern Europe knows, is that we're in a global war right now. And the bad guys have just had their planning meeting, their strategy meeting. They've been acting on this information that we're in a global war for several years now. The West, the Americans, much of Europe has not been acting on this information. So I think there's showing this clarity, of who's where is, I think, really important.
Does Trump understand this finally? Because, he admitted as much in this short clip we played earlier, where he said, I thought it would be easy, but it turns out ending this particular war isn't. So he was also very critical of the meeting in China, just as you mentioned. So is he sort of coming to a certain position that is going to strengthen the Western resolve overall, if you would comment on that?
Yeah, so Trump's having a learning process here, and and he's got the same obstacle that Biden had. Biden had this strategy of escalation management, where they slowly managed the escalation of this because they were deathly afraid that Putin was going to use, and and again, Putin has threatened that many times. But if Biden had let Ukraine be as aggressive as they wanted to be in 2023, you and I would not be having this conversation right now. So Trump's got to go through that same learning process, and he's doing it. And
but doesn't, excuse
we
me,
see him sort of like.
Excuse me for interrupting you, but in a sense, Trump bears some responsibility for that, because he was telling Biden all the time that he was going to cause World War III and nuclear holocaust. And he stopped the Congress from passing the bill on Ukraine support for months.
No, that's not accurate. I was there. I was in the middle of that. And what happened was that the pro-Ukraine Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, passed a $300 million aid bill for Ukraine, and 7 members of the Republican Party, 7 pro-Russian members of the Republican Party, stood up and said, let's vote the pro-Ukraine Speaker out. And every Democrat in the U.S. House of Representatives joined with those 7 members of the Moscow caucus of the Republican Party and voted out the pro-Ukraine Speaker of the House.
Okay, but remind me, did Donald Trump try to convince these 7 members to vote along with Stephen McCarthy, or did he let him fall?
I don't recall Donald Trump being involved with that terribly. And again, I was there. As I recall, Donald Trump was pretty silent at that time, and frankly could have blown it up at any time. If you look at what happened with Speaker Johnson for the next 6 months, Donald Trump could have blown that up any time with one single tweet, but he didn't. So, again, Speaker Johnson put his job on the line in April of last year as the 3rd most powerful American to get that aid bill passed.
Right.
And, and again, the Democrats were no help.
Right. From where you are in Ukraine, how does Ukraine view the developments of the last few days? Is this something that they are encouraged with, or are they increasingly concerned?
Well, Adam, the Ukrainians are just like you. They're getting dizzy from their head spinning from Trump saying one thing and saying another. And as I've told people since the Trump first term, is if you try to follow and if you obsess about everything Trump says every day, you will develop a dependency on anti-anxiety meds and good Polish vodka. So you have to kind of watch the trajectory, and the trajectory we're on is really good. And that is that, Vladimir Putin, here's the fundamentals. Vladimir Putin is the irresistible force of wanting to take over Ukraine and all of Eastern Europe. And Donald Trump is the immovable object of wanting peace in Ukraine. Now, whether that's peace that's just, or whether that's peace that's lasting, or whether it's just because he wants to get a Nobel Prize, is a bunch of other questions. But nonetheless, those two things cannot exist in the same space at the same time. So, there is going to be a point at which Donald Trump loses patience, and and I think we're close.
Are we close to this point where he loses patience?
What you tell me, would you say that Donald Trump, would you characterize him as a patient man?
Well, I put so many wrong bets on this that I don't volunteer to make another. I leave it to you.
Yeah. Listen, I think that, and here's the secret weapon that Ukraine has, Melania Trump, right? The woman that shares his bed tells him every night, and here's how many drones that Putin launched into Ukraine today. And
she even helped him today understand the question from a journalist, right?
Listen, it pays to have an Eastern European in the White House. That's all I'm saying. So,
and that's a good line.
So I think that we're getting there.
Yeah, and that's a good line to finish on. Stephen Moore, Ukraine Freedom Project, Thank you very much.
Adam, always great.
This was World News Tonight. Thank you for watching. And stay on for Face to Face with our editor-in-chief, Michał Broniatowski, who will share his insight into this week's top events. Good night.